Well, good morning. Welcome to our Friday Bible study. We're kind of winding down now with our grand sweep. Today we'll be looking at the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh minor prophets. And so obviously these are all really short books and they just keep getting shorter. There will be one day that you will read completely through one of the prophets. Um, and then there's going to be a day where you spend a little bit more time in about 3 days. And so this week you're going to have three different opportunities to look at three completely different prophets. Again, we said that the minor prophets are not minor. They don't have less to say. What they have to say is any less important or anything like that. It just has to do with the amount of materials that they have. So all of the major prophets we had sometimes are 40, 50 verses, chapters rather. And these are all getting down to 7 chapters, 4 chapters, 3 chapters. So these are the very short prophets, what we call the minor prophets. And actually, we just have a few more to go, actually 5. And you'll read through those very quickly. And then we're going to move into the book of Revelation and take a look at that. The one book that we didn't deal with was Chronicles. And I'm just going to leave that up to you if that's something that you want to do or not. Chronicles is exactly that. It's the chronicles of all the stuff that we basically have been reading. So it's kind of a rehashing of things that you've already read. If you enjoy that kind of thing, then I will encourage you to go ahead and go to Chronicles. I'll make a little bit of a comment when we get to that point on both of those so that you can put everything into perspective. For today's purposes, we are going to take a look at 3 minor prophets. The first is one that everybody knows about. You can ask a little 5-year-old about Jonah, who's our prophet for the day, and they can tell you the story about Jonah and the fish. He has been invited by God to go preach at Nineveh and to bring judgment on those that live in Nineveh. Who is it that lives in Nineveh? Oh, yeah, it's the good old guys that have been causing so much trouble. It's actually the Babylonians. This is their capital. So he's been invited to go and to preach judgment. And the problem with Jonah is that Jonah is unlike any other prophet that you're going to find. Jonah, you could describe as mean, nasty. He's suspicious. He's reluctant. God tells him to go and do something, and he doesn't want to do it. He's rebellious. And in fact, he even hates his own God. So, I mean, what kind of prophet is that? He doesn't listen. He berates his own God. He doesn't like his own God. He thinks his God is too soft. And so the chapter 1, you're going to find his flight that he's taking off. He's supposed to be going to Nineveh. He ends up off of a ship. He ends up in the belly of a fish. Chapter 2, well, he's changed his tune a little bit because now he's praying to God. He's trying to get God to help him. Chapter 3, yay, he's finally doing what he's supposed to do, to go and preach to those at Nineveh. And as it might be, chapter 4 is the story of Jonah learning. What were the lessons that he learned through all of this? And how does he become a little better prophet for God? So his commission, his calling, his invitation is to go to Nineveh. But instead, he goes the opposite direction. And God is not very happy with him. He gets on a boat, goes the opposite direction, and he's going to get thrown off of that ship. And it's going to be the big fish that we call the whale that's going to bring him back towards Nineveh and bring him back in the right direction. Now, one of the things about this particular book is there are a number of miracles that are found in here, and Jesus even testifies to the miracles. They're in there, and I'd like to read that for you. You'll find that in the Gospel of Matthew. It's Matthew 12, um, 38 through about 41. Then some of the Pharisees and teachers of the law said to him, "Teacher, we want to see a miraculous sign from you." He answered, "A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given, except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will stand at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they are repented in the preaching of Jonah, and now one greater than Jonah is here." So Jesus doesn't hesitate to talk about the story of Jonah. Jesus doesn't hesitate to talk about what it is that Jonah finally learned. You see, Jonah's problem with God is that he didn't want to preach to the Ninevites because he felt God was too soft on him. He didn't like God's grace. He didn't like God's love. He didn't like God's forgiveness. And so you find this back and forth between God and what God wants him to do and what he wants to do. And the thing that he really doesn't want to do is he doesn't want to go to these Ninevites and prophesy and then have God turn right around and say, "Well, I'm going to forgive you." You see, that's the problem. He thinks that God is way, way too soft. And so this is really an allegory. When you read it, the best way to read it is as an allegory. It's a story that may have been one of the early stories that you learned in Bible school or in Sunday school. Ask any little kid, 5, 6, or even younger than that, and even if they don't have Christian parents and don't go to church, they probably can tell you the story of Noah. It's a story that's been told many, many times. It's been illustrated in books. It's on wallpaper in little kids' rooms. So Jonah is a big hit with the kids. And he is our fifth prophet, our fifth minor prophet that we have. And one of the things about this book is it's the only book that we have, is the only prophet that we have that ends by asking a question. It's a very good question about who is wiser, who is more loving than God. Basically, he asks, is there anybody else like God? And the question is answered by saying, no, there is no one else like God. God is God. There's nobody in his category. There's nobody like him. And that's what Jonah has to learn. And I would have to say Jonah's in some ways one of my favorite prophets because I felt I was very much like Jonah when I was getting ready to graduate from undergraduate. I knew in my soul that God had called me into ministry, but that's not really what I wanted to do. My mother was sure that I should be a dentist, and I thought maybe I should go into business administration. I always kind of liked that. And so my plans were to go into business. And I had already looked at a master's degree program in business. And so I just kind of felt God saying, I want you to do this, I want you to do this. So I thought, okay. So I applied to 4 seminaries: Yale, Harvard, Princeton, and Duke. And that's with somebody with about a C plus average. And 90% of my class had a B plus and better average. And so I didn't hear from Yale, didn't hear from Harvard, didn't hear from Princeton. I think when they got my applications, they probably had a good laugh and said, okay, made my day. But lo and behold, that year, two things happened at Duke. They started a Black Studies program, and they had more Black seminarians than they had ever had, and started a beautiful legacy that continues on in that seminary even till now. The other thing they did is they took a look at the student body, and they noticed it was way, way out of proportion with Methodists and very few of anybody else. And they felt like that wasn't healthy, that there needed to be a good, healthy dialogue in the classes. So that particular year, instead of taking 100 students, they took 120, and they really mixed it up in terms of the different denominations. And I was the first one of my denomination that had been to Duke and as long as anybody could remember. So I think I went along just for the ride because I was a little bit different in terms of the group that I represented. And when that door opened up, I was kind of like Jonah. Even Jeff could understand that God was really pushing and saying, okay, you've been going the other way. It's time to turn around, and it's time to head where I want you to go. And when you do that, you find some marvelous things that happen in your life. I think of what I would have missed if I had just gone the other way and not listened, or if I had closed that open door. And that's what Jonah learns. He would have missed a lot of wonderful experiences. He would have missed learning to love God and to understand God a little bit better and to serve God as he was called to do. And so Jonah is another one who didn't close the door when that door opened up. He kind of said in his own way, here I am, send me. And then he made some wonderful discoveries about prophecy, just as I made some wonderful discoveries about ministry. And so that's our first guy that we find. He's the 5th out of 12. The 6th out of 12 is a little guy by the name of Micah. And this is going to be a little bit longer. He's going to be 7 chapters long. And this is a book that asks the question, almost like the other one did, who is like God? And they both come to the same conclusion that nobody is like God. The thing about Micah that's interesting as you're reading, you need to see this in terms of a courtroom. Micah is bringing God into the courtroom, and he is going to be the one that's going to question Judah. He's going to question Judah about its idolatry. He's going to question Judah about its breaking of the covenant. He's going to question Judah about its intentions. He's going to question Judah about listening. He's going to question Judah about breaking the 10 Commandments. And so this is the first book is set up as an allegory. This is set up as a viewing of a courtroom where God is asking questions of a very guilty nation by the name of Judah. His messages that he gives are kind of threefold. First of all, he gives a message about calamity is coming. It's right around the corner. And then he talks a little bit about corrupt judges that have been a part of God's planting, and they didn't flower, they didn't flourish, they didn't do what he wanted them to do. And so he indicts them about not becoming the kingdom of Judah that they were supposed to become. And then he finally brings Judah to God's courtroom, Judah as a nation now instead of individuals. And the charge, surprisingly, is not only going to be about the idolatry and about the breaking of the covenant, but this is a very interesting theme that we have here because the charge is ingratitude. Interesting charge, isn't it? Ingratitude. So the nation of Israel is being asked to take a look at all the things that God has done for them. He's offered to be their God if they would be his people. He's given them a covenant. He's given them the 10 Commandments. He's given them people like Moses, and he's given them all of these prophets, prophet after prophet after prophet. And they just are not grateful for all the things he has done for them, all the things he has given them, the fact that through all of this time, he has not given up on them. And so basically, the courtroom paints the picture of a very ungrateful clod by the name of Judah. One of the things that you have to love about this prophet is, despite all of his condemnation that he's going to give, again, we're going to have more bad news, he also has the hope in his mind of a righteous remnant, of Judah that's actually going to be able to go back to the land of milk and honey, back to the promised land, and to start all over again. He's now thinking about somebody, the righteous remnant, that's going to be able to meet all the fulfillments, all the promises, all the things that God is going to ask. So he starts by talking in his first chapter about the sources of judgment. The people have done this to themselves. And so any judgment that they get is just, because they've got this and even more coming. He's going to give them a chance in the second chapter to respond to all their shortcomings, to all the accusations. I mean, that's part of the legal team's responsibility, is to have a chance for their person to respond. And so this is Judah's opportunity to respond. So in chapter 2, Judah's going to tell you why they did what they did, why they're the way that they are, why they didn't listen, why they broke the covenant, why they didn't pay any attention to the 10 Commandments, why they didn't appreciate all the things that God had done for them. And then they're going to look at the events that are getting ready to happen. And fourthly, in the fourth chapter, he's going to remind them that they are people who are going to receive judgment. Maybe they're going to understand all the things, but now is time to pay the piper. Now it's time to feel God's anger and his wrath. Even though he hasn't given up on them, he still is going to bring about judgment. Again, he holds out hope. He talks about a new Davidic monarch. Wonder who that is. Yeah, this is one of the Jesus moments that you find here, because he's getting ready to start talking about the Messiah that's getting ready to come, the Son of God that is going to kind of take care of all this mess, all this ingratitude. He is a contemporary of Isaiah, he's a contemporary of Amos, and he's a contemporary of Hosea. So as you read, you need to kind of lump him into these other three. He goes through 3 different kings, like most of our prophets. There are very few of the prophets that just have one king. They have to have different relationships with different kings. Some have had 3, some 4, some 5. And this particular prophet has 3. Want to take a guess who his mother is? I'll give you a hint. Samson. His mother is Delilah. So that's just kind of a little interesting twist that we find. And then you're going to just have a one-day encounter with a prophet named Nahum. This is 3 chapters, and his name in Hebrew literally means comforter. So finally, we have somebody that's not a bad news bearer, that is a little more in terms of comforting. One of the things that it's very rare to find with these prophets is very often they don't put things in chronological order, but rather they just keep moving events around to meet their own needs in their writing. This guy not only brings good news, but everything is in chronological order the way that it was. And it's written in Jerusalem. He writes about the end of the Assyrian Empire. Remember the Assyrian Empire? They were just, tearing everybody up, winning all the wars and everything. And guess what their capital is? Nineveh. Where was Jonah asked to go? Nineveh. The Assyrians were ruthless. So again, you get another idea why Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh, because here are these terrible Assyrians that think nothing about taking your head off. And so Jonah's just a little bit afraid of that. He's not really the kind of guy that you would really want to call as a prophet. And besides that, he feels like even if he's there with judgment, that God's going to be so soft on these guys from Nineveh that his work's just going to be undone. So kind of an interesting twist the way that Nahum and Jonah kind of meet at Nineveh and deal with these Assyrians. If you remember, almost all of the prophets that we've had up till now, they not only talk about judgment on Judah, but they also talk about judgment on other nations. So even if it's a nation like Assyria that God uses to bring about judgment and uses to bring about his ways, somewhere along the line, they're going to have judgment as well. So all these prophets talk about not only the judgment on Judah, but the judgment on all of these other nations. And that's the case in this particular little vignette that you're going to find, that he's going to talk about now judgment on Assyria. Now, the thing about Nahum is that he is a poet as well. So not only are you going to get things in a chronological vein, but you're also going to find a lot of poetry. That's who he is. So this is written unlike any of the other books that we have read. He's unlike any of the other prophets. Who would guess that you would find all this in poetry? Well, he has three basic points that he wants to make. First of all, that God is slow to anger. And you might say it's a good thing, because look at all the stuff that's been happening through all of these prophets. And this is a message even for us in this century, that God is slow to anger. The second message that he brings about, though, is that God does not ignore rebellion, does not ignore guilty people. And so that is going to be a part of what he's going to teach here. And lastly, he says that God brings about vengeance and wrath. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And so, yeah, you get some good news, but you also get some really bad news as well. And so he speaks even a little bit to the present, in that God is going to punish evil. We're getting close to the end of our Bible reading. We're going to be turning to Revelation in just a little bit here, not too many days down the road. And that's one of the great themes of the book, is that God will punish evil. And you're getting it right here from this prophet. But the other part of that is that God will protect those who trust him. Two ends of the spectrum. He's going to protect those who trust him. He's going to punish those who don't trust him, and those who live an evil life and make bad choices. So what's the bottom line of this? The bottom line of this is he is prophesying the destruction of Nineveh. He's foretelling the destruction of Nineveh, just as we found Jeremiah telling about the destruction of Jerusalem. And just like Jeremiah, he actually was able to see that with his own eyes, and he became a part of his own predictions. The same thing is going to happen here with this wonderful prophet. So in 1612, Nineveh is ransacked, Nineveh is burned, and how does that happen? Well, let's go back to some of those other prophets that were always talking about judgment of other nations, and that other nations would be a part of God's judgment. Here we have the Persians, the Medes, oh yes, the Babylonians, and other nations that come in and destroy the Assyrians. And so these big groups and these other nations, what they do is they take and they divide the region, and now it's in about 5 different parts. If you were to ask where this is today, if you go to Iraq and you hear a lot of things being said about Mosul, that's where Nineveh is even this particular day. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a background of these books that you're going to be reading very quickly. 7 chapters, 4 chapters, 3 chapters, and at the end of the week, you're finished with 3 of the minor prophets. And that's going to be 5, 6, and 7, which tells us we've only got about 5 more left. So if you got your pen and paper, let me give you the other voices for today. We're going to use the Bible Project again. So the first one is Overview, Jonah, YouTube, Bible Project. And it's 9 minutes and 5 seconds long. The next one we're going to look at is the same thing, Overview, Micah, M-I-C-A-H, Bible Project, YouTube. This one's about 6 minutes long, and it has all those little sketches. And we can't miss our new friend, Pastor Landon. So it's the Prophet Micah, M-I-C-H-A, in 3 minutes. Pastor Landon, L-A-N-D-O-N. And it's done in 3 minutes. I love this guy. He's so funny, and he kind of makes it easy to understand. And then we're going to look at Nahum, the prophet Nahum, in 3 minutes. Again, Pastor Landon, YouTube. And as he proclaims, it's going to be 3 minutes. So by the time you finish listening to me, and by the time you listen to these 4 selections, it's going to be about an hour's Bible study. And you're going to get lots of different voices, have lots of different understandings before you dig in, because you're not going to really have a whole lot of time to think much about it, because you're going to be jumping from one prophet to the next prophet to the next prophet. And each day you're going to be reading less and less and less. And we eventually are getting ready to get down to some of these prophets where it's just 1 chapter. So we're getting very, very, very close to the end. And so today is a little bit different, because now we're talking about Nineveh and the Assyrians. We're still talking a little bit about the Babylonians. We're still talking about Judah. We're still talking about the fact that God is not happy that they have broken the covenant, that they have not paid attention to the 10 commandments. And yet all of these remind us that God doesn't give up, that he continues to watch over his people, particularly the ones who trust him. Jonah even thinks that God's way too soft, and that's why God doesn't get real happy with Jonah, because Jonah thinks he's going to do all of his work and then God's going to let him off the hook. And that's not the case. So I hope that you enjoy these 3 guys. They're completely different. You've got an allegory, you've got a courtroom set up, and then you have this last one that's going to just go by very, very quickly, that's going to forecast the way that Nineveh is going to be destroyed, just the same way that there was a forecast and a prophecy about Jerusalem being destroyed. And so you're going to be privy to all of that this week. I hope that you enjoy getting back into the pages of Scripture. Thank you for joining us today, and I invite you to join us on Sunday for our worship service at 9:30. It's going to be on our Facebook page, and we will have the music and the bulletin up about a half an hour before that, so you can take a look at that. And if you want to just print the music off so that you can sing, we'll just be singing, I think, 2 verses of each one of them. And as I think all of you heard, we've decided to hold off just a little bit longer on starting up church. Things have taken a little bit of a turn in our area, so we want to be respectful of that. We don't want to put anybody in harm's way, even though we feel like we've got a really good plan that's going to do the social distancing and ask people to have masks and to wash their hands. And all the research is showing that those are the 3 things which are so very, very important. And the countries that have recuperated the fastest are ones who have taken that very seriously and have kept their masks on. Every time they go out, every time they have contact, every time they touch something, they wash their hands, and they keep 6 foot of social distancing. So we know that that goes a long way, but again, we don't want to take any chances with anybody. Everybody in this area is just too precious to us to put anybody at harm. So we're going to wait until we feel like it's much, much safer. And at that point, then we'll talk about opening the church back up. We're going to meet again in 2 weeks and reevaluate to see what we want to do. And this also gives us a chance to watch what's happening in other churches in America and even around us to learn some things. That's one of the great things about life is you watch others. It's live and learn. And so we're going to try to do that so we can keep things at the best level that we possibly can when it's time to come back. And I'm like you, boy, oh boy, I miss seeing you eye to eye. This is about the best we can do, but we also would invite you to join us when we sing Happy Birthday. We do that to everybody that has birthdays during the month. It's usually at 9:30 in the morning. We have our masks. We do our social distancing. But the nice thing is, even for 5 or 10 minutes, you get a chance to see everybody and to talk with everybody. We sang Happy Birthday to Mary Lou this morning, and also to Trinity. And it was so nice to be able to stand around and see some familiar faces and find out what was going on in people's lives. And so I'd invite you to do that. That's been a really great idea. We're also going to start back up our practice for the bell choir here, and we will incorporate the bell choir in the Saturday services that we do that you play. So to be a little more like it normally is. Their first presentation they're going to do is a patriotic one the Sunday after Father's Day. And so we're excited that that's going to happen. I give thanks for Jim and Ellen and beautiful music that they provide every Sunday, and a number of you have said that to us. I also thank Karen for doing all the arranging, getting things together, and the bulletin, and being the liturgist, and our friend Gary, who's always back there being sure that everybody looks good and sounds good, and that you have a really good picture to be able to enjoy to make you feel like you're almost home. It's not going to be much longer, so just kind of hang in there a little bit longer. And God loves you, and so do I. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you on our Facebook page on Sunday.